Oh, hey!
Hey!
We're making a video!
Boop boop ba doo.
Runner.
Boop boop boop.
Runner.
Boop boop ba doo boop boop boop.
Okay.
Hello!
Hello!
Welcome to the Dalhousie Women's Center, except you can't really see it, so it's pretty much just welcome to me and Ellen!
Yay!
Yay!
So, we're gonna start making weekly videos.
Weekly videos.
And tell you about all the fun things at our Women's Center.
Yeah, the Dalhousie Women's Center. Maybe we should introduce ourselves.
Oh, okay. My name is Ellen, and I'm the campaigns coordinator.
And I'm Hayley, and my hands aren't even in here.
Hi.
Hello. I am the advocacy and outreach coordinator. What else should we tell them about these topics every week?
So, you guys can send us in topics that we can talk about if you want, or we can just choose random ones.
Yeah, we have a lot of random things going on in our heads about the feminism. All of the feminism, all of
Sex.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, recently in the feminism, there's been lots of conversations about consensual, unwanted sex. So the idea is that a lot of individuals don't necessarily identify experiences as rape or sexual assault, but leaving those experiences realize that though they said yes, they really didn't want that to happen, and it was a really shitty experience, which is really sad.
So, you were talking about unwanted consensual sex.
Also, this is Sandy. She is
Hi.
our artist in residence.
You turned into a ghost.
And I am now a ghost. But back onto the topic of unwanted
Consensual
consensual sex.
Yeah. So, research is sort of coming out that I think is really interesting, that even though we've got, like, particularly young women consenting to unwanted acts, which, like, a lot of people see as something unimportant, because since you're consenting, there's no way to define, like, violation. I think it's interesting that, like, statistics and research are coming out with the fact that these people are still experiencing signs of trauma. So, like, there's no, like, clear defined, like, attacker and victim, but they're still, like, have the similar reactions, like PTSD and different kinds of trauma that come with sexual assault or, like, molestation, which I think is, like, a reason why we should really be, like, expanding our definitions of violence to not just be like, there's this one person and they're attacking you, versus, like, cultural violence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really unfortunate that the way that things are structured right now is that, like, if you identify your experience as sexual assault or rape, then there's all these resources, and there's all this, like, we're going to help you, or maybe I should say there aren't all these resources, but there's some.
Yeah.
But then if you're in a situation where you're like, but I consented, there aren't any resources, and there's nobody who is going to be there to support and, like, talk you through it, or they're going to kind of deconstruct it and try to figure out in this binary way, you know, was it rape or wasn't it rape, and identify that experience for you. And I guess, yeah, what we're calling for is, like, an expansion of those conversations and, like, what fits into, like, non-healthy sexual behavior. Yeah. What do you think?
Something I saw interesting on this website called The Provocracy, which is this cool blog that talks a lot about consent, was redefining the script for sex. So right now she's talking about, right now there's a sexual script where, like, you know, usually the man in a heterosexual sort of setting, there's a script where, like, the man starts kissing the woman, and if she kisses back, then, you know, stuff sort of follows. Like, he'll start, like, you know, undressing himself, and she'll undress, and then he will stick his penis in her, kind of thing. And there's no, like, conversation around it. Like, and she was talking about her idea was, I'm not really sure how I would incorporate this personally, but I thought it was a cool idea. Her idea was that you would sort of ask before you do things.
Yeah.
So, like, may I kiss you now? And she was talking about how, like, it doesn't have to be very clinical. That can also be sexy.
Yeah, it can be super erotic. I wrote a column on that, and just how, like, asking what people like is actually really hot, and being able to be like, I want to kiss like, in some ways, it's much more vulnerable, and it puts you in a situation where you have to, like, own your vulnerability and discomfort and, like, awkwardness that sex often entails. But yeah, it can also be a lot more.
Yeah, and also the idea of people, you know at every stage that the person really wants to do as much as you. Just that idea, as opposed to like, oh, I'm into this, but you don't really know how the other person feels.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm not into this, but I don't know how to like say anything about it, and stuff's kind of happening, and no conversations occurring.
Yeah.
And I feel weird stopping in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of this weird, like, paradox where, on, like, one hand, like, we talk about sex all the time. It's, like, in our movies, it's in our advertising, like, it's, like, culturally we make jokes about it all the time, and it's, like, this site of conversation, particularly among, like, youth-aged or adolescents, but then, like, we're still under the assumption that, like, in order, like, to communicate during any kind of sexual activity, like, isn't really what you're supposed to do. Like, the idea of, like, having any kind of interaction that isn't physical is, like, considered a mood breaker, right? So even, like, for the longest time, like, the idea of asking someone to put a condom on was seen as, like, a buzzkill, right? And, like, so it's like, oh, okay, so I can't even ask you to, like, use protective measures when we're having sex because that will, like, kill the mood. And I think that's really, like, interesting that, like, on one hand, we're, like, always talking about it, but when we actually need to be talking about it, we think that's, like, super unsexy and can't deal with it.
Totally.
I feel like a lot of the time, too, when it is talked about in society, it's always, like, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Like, no one will ever say, like, vagina on television, but people will be, like, fully, like,
or they'll
having
out
sex.
vagina.
Yeah. It reminds me of, like, when we've done talks to, like, younger university students about consent and them being like, but how do you know? How do you know it was rape? Like, blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, well, if you use that kind of, like, consensual, like, what does Jacqueline Friedman call it? Enthusiastic consensual model, then you always know, because it's like, I want to do this. How do you feel about that? Like, and that dialogue is just, like, there from the get-go.
Yeah.
And I think, like, the hardest thing for that with people is that it really moves you away from, like this gendered script of sexuality where, like, men are the aggressors and they're, like, having sex because they're, like, sexuality is uncontrolled and they get pleasure out of having sex with women, and women are getting pleasure out of, like, pleasing men, right? So there's, like, that old script that's, like, still continues to be used, and it moves towards this, like, mutual pleasure, which is, like, really vulnerable for people and really hard for them to, like, grasp this idea of, like, doing things that is, like, for the benefit of both.
And it's also a script that's been so internalized that it's hard as, like, anyone who's been told that for their entire lives to identify, like, a sexual experience outside of that script as something that they want, which is really problematic.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that, like, really plays into, particularly when it comes to unwanted consensual sex, is, like, living in a rape culture or in a culture that, like, often associates sexual interaction with violence, and they get, like, really closely intertwined, where there's, like, violence is seen as really sexy in our culture. Like, that's even in the cultural script of, like, men as aggressors, it's not just, like, oh, they, they're gonna, like, kiss you now, but it's, like, if you watch movies, I, like, become really hypersensitive to this, is, like, they'll, like, throw you on the bed and, like, ravish you, and it's, like, supposed to be this big passion, and, like, that can be really passionate for sure, but, like, depending on which movie you're watching, it can be, like, more extreme or less extreme, so there's, like, where you're not really sure if there's consent going on because they don't talk about it and the woman just, like, gets thrown around.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's seen as, like, that's being upheld in the throw of passion, and, like, you shouldn't break that because, everybody wants
you're
that.
ruining the mood. It's like, do you want to do this? And it's like, what? We're not talking.
We're done already?
I saw this thing on College Candy. It was, like, things not to do during sex, and it was, like, give suggestions. It's like, don't give suggestions.
That's terrible.
And if you think about it, that's sort of, like, replicated in a lot of other things, like Cosmo, for example. All their tips are based on this idea that you can't just say what you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to sneakily figure out what they want without ever using your words.
Yeah, and then you have to like suggest with your body what the other person should do.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, should we? So dear people of the internet,
Send us what you think.
send us. Yeah, let us know what you think about non-consensual sex. Sorry, about that and consensual unwanted sex. Oh, I just get tongue-tied. And other topics that you want us to talk about.
Yeah.
Woo.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. I don't know how to stop it.
Boop boop ba doo.
Runner.
Boop boop boop.
Runner.
Boop boop ba doo. Boop 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 boop.